Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of the Jets Life Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony, and today we're going to get into the stock reports for all players on the Jets, how are players performing through minicamp and through OTAs. And then eventually we'll kind of kick into some of the current events that are going on with the Jets. Obviously, Geno Smith's situation is still one, still one that has a lot of question marks around it, a lot of concerns of whether or not he'll be available. I'll get into my takes on whether or not he'll be playing for the New York Jets this year, or if there's any suspensions that's going to happen, when those will happen. I'll give my opinions based on just some previous facts, previous players that maybe had other legal issues going on outside of football, and how those situations were handled. But the first thing I want to really get a second to talk about here, obviously, some news circulated over the past couple of days. Chris Johnson went on Blue's Good Morning America, talking about his diagnosis of ALS. Chris Johnson obviously played with the Jets in 2014, but before that with Tennessee Titans. Had an outstanding career in the NFL, obviously in his second season, 2,000-yard rusher. But obviously any player previously with the Jets, just want to make sure that we all understand, whether they're here for a day, here for a year, here for their entire careers. Once a Jet, always a Jet, is what I like to say. And for a player like Chris Johnson, hoping, my prayers are out to him, his family, everyone's being impacted by, everything going on with him. It's obviously not a diagnosis anybody would want to take lightly. So again, our thoughts and prayers with Chris Johnson and his entire family as they get through this very, very difficult time. Again, nobody wants to deal with any sort of diagnosis here, and ALS is one to definitely not take lightly. So wishing the best for him as he goes through this very, very difficult time. I guess going from one negative subject into another, and I'll try and make this topic very, very brief here. But the Geno Smith situation, I talked about at the top of the show here. If you haven't heard already, obviously this news has been out there for about a week and a half, maybe a little bit more than that. On June 21st, there was a police call to his house. Apparently, a woman by the name of Kristen reported him for battery, said he, stole her money, claimed that he hit her, all this stuff. And there's been a lot of back and forth between, obviously, Geno Smith's situation. The police have kind of, backstepped a little bit on their initial conversations. I believe it was Rich Smee that reported, and I don't want to put words out there, but I believe it was Rich that reported that the case was basically closed. And then a couple of days later, it was reported again that the police have kind of worked their way back, and it's been handed over to a detective, and the case is under review. So obviously, investigation is still ongoing. I'm not sure if it's a situation where more evidence became available to them that forced them to keep the case open. Not sure if it's because of a high-profile type of situation with a celebrity, an athlete that's out in the public media, to keep the case open for that reason. Not sure what would have caused for the facts to change, but obviously, something to be concerned for if you're a fan of this team, as we all are. But the situation, I would say here, if you're a Jet fan, obviously, again, concerns for the facts here. If this is true, then obviously, football aside, this isn't the biggest issue. Football is not the end-all be-all in this type of situation. Obviously, you want good players on the field, but you also want good people on the field as well. And if this is a case where he, if battery is the case here, and he did steal money from this woman and, break her computer or whatever other reports are out there on this case, obviously, you want him penalized to the full extent of the law. My thoughts here on this situation is there's been a lot of cases where, the NFL's kind of put that mandate out there and kind of taken action swiftly. You look at situations like Ray Rice, not the most swift type of situation, but eventually they did do the right thing and suspend him for that season, and he never saw a football field again. But there's been other situations too. The Ray Rice situation, where obviously, all signs pointed to, he was in the wrong. Ended up playing the remainder of that season, and then eventually, I think he even played some games the following year before eventually facing a suspension. So the reason I'm bringing all this stuff up about Ray Rice is that I don't think that there's enough time, here we are in June, to where the case will be kind of a decision we made by the legal side of things. I don't think this would impact Geno Smith's availability. I think if you ask me today, is he starting week one? My opinion is that he'll be out there and he'll be the starting quarterback. Maybe there's something that accelerates, maybe some evidence pops up that he will miss some time as the season goes on. But I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think even it's been reported out there that the likelihood is that this is going to be a 2027 situation and not necessarily a 2026 situation, which for the Jets, that's good news that he will likely play this season. But again, we're in the early stages of the situation. There's not enough information out there for all of us to really make one decision or another. Even for the NFL, I don't think there's enough information out there for them to make a decision on whether or not he'll be suspended. I don't think it'll be an issue for this season, but obviously the situation has a lot of concern because, keeping it in football terms here, obviously I mentioned already, the off-field issues, why there's concerns there. But on the football field, you got Cade Klubnik, Bailey Zappi, Brady Cook. None of these guys, household names by any means. Obviously, major question mark on what Cade Klubnik can be at the next level. Rookie drafted just this past draft. Brady Cook, seen enough of him. He came in tank time in December and did his job and got us to the second overall pick. And for all intents and purposes, that's probably the extent of what he'll be as a New York Jet quarterback. Maybe he can turn into something, but doubtful. Bailey Zappi, enough said there. We've seen him plenty as well throughout his career. I think we're good with the Bailey Zappi type of situation. At best, he's a backup quarterback that fills in for a start or two. And again, Cade Klubnik, I just don't think is ready. Maybe he could be, I know it's floated out there that out of all the quarterbacks, he could be the next Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy doesn't come around every other year or anything like that. That's a rare occurrence. He was last pick in the draft in that year, and then obviously Cade Klubnik being a fifth-round pick. You can't expect that out of a rookie picked in the fifth round. He was picked in the fifth round for a reason. So obviously some development is needed. It's up to Frank Reich to develop him and get him prepared to hopefully play sometime later in the year. But, for the Jets to have the most successful season possible, we're all hoping and praying that Geno Smith can play the full season, that Geno Smith can reach that level that he was with at Seattle for the few years he played there. That would be the best case scenario for this team. And, Cade Klubnik not be on the football field is a good situation for this team. You want them to raise the floor. That's been identified by a lot of the Jets' moves in the offseason. Revamping the front seven, really the front line, was a major point of emphasis. And bringing in an adult to play quarterback, one with experience recently, where he's shown he could be top 20, top 15 type of quarterback. That is the best case scenario. You want to see what you have in a lot of these younger players. You want to see what you have in Garrett Wilson with, legitimate passer on the field with him. You want to see what A.D. Mitchell can do after, and we'll get into stock up and stock down, but seems like he's moving in the right direction for this team. You want to see if Omar Cooper can, eventually turn into a legitimate option for what we all think would be a 2027 rookie at quarterback for the following season. And obviously all the other skill players, Breece Hall, you want to see what he can do with a quarterback back there. Can, lanes open up in the running game for him to kind of use that speed, that dynamic playmaking ability that we all know he has and he's shown signs of in this league. This is what we need for all that to transpire, is for Geno Smith to be on the football field. And again, legal situation, everything going on the side. Just hope, hope there's no truth to this. That's obviously situation number one. You want good people playing football. You don't want, for lack of a better word, scumbags out there ruining the sport. And I think we all have gotten to know Geno Smith over the years. Obviously, the first situation had a little bit of immaturity to it. and eventually he was, casted out and has worked his way back to starting quarterback potential. Um, Obviously, he's much older than he was last time. You just hope that these off the field issues have not too much validity to them, if any at all. That's a concern there. That's obviously what we all care about is just get through the situation, and hopefully it all kind of goes away. And Geno Smith has a great season for the Jets, and we can move forward. But until more information becomes available, unfortunately, we just don't know what this all entails. But again, my thoughts are, if other players like Ray Rice, who were clearly guilty of off the field incidences, was able to finish up a season, I would expect that Geno Smith should be fair to wrap up the season. But we'll see. Obviously, more information to come. But for the big thing here, I want to obviously touch on a few other things here, but obviously the big point of the episode: stock up, stock down. It's always a good point of topic whenever we're going through any off season, and just wanted to touch on a few players here that I know for this one, Rich Smee put some ideas out there of players that have their stock up a little bit. Just want to touch on some of these players and just give my opinions on these players and what their roles look like and what they should be this coming season. So we'll get started on this. Obviously, Geno Smith, I just brought up, for this team to reach their highest potential, Geno Smith has to be on the field. He just has to be there. He has to be, some iteration of what we saw in Seattle and a lot less of the situation we saw in Oakland. Obviously, a lot of other factors in Oakland with a poor offensive line. A lot of other issues there that, out of Geno Smith's control, the offensive coordinator situation. There was a whole bunch of noise in that Oakland Raiders building, or Vegas Raiders building, that, were out of his control. He had his issues. He was not perfect by any means, but obviously I'm hoping, and we're all thinking, we can get a little bit more of what we all saw in Seattle versus what we saw with the Raiders. But in order for Geno Smith to reach those heights, we have some other players that, Rich Smee has reported are all playing to good potentials. Number one being A.D. Mitchell. And actually, I do want to bring up here, something I noticed with Rich Smee's report out there is that, a lot of Jets players that have stock up are offensive skill players, which, when was the last time that you saw that ever for the Jets, let alone minicamp, training camp, whatever have you? It's been a long time since we've had positive news to report for the Jets from the offense side of the football. So very, very thrilled that the Jets have some offensive players in here. But again, going down the line here, Braylon Allen, one player that has a stock up. That's a player I would really love to just kind of take this season and use as a building block. If he can be the player that we all have been hoping he could be for the last couple of years, then you're talking about a situation where the Jets have a true two-headed monster at running back that could complement each other very, very well. Breece Hall with his outside speed, Braylon Allen with his power out the middle, and he does have speed too. Obviously, well documented by a few runs he's had historically in training camp the last couple of years, but we just haven't seen enough of it in the regular season. Want to see more of that, obviously, for us to get some additional excitement. The Jets can go in there with two running backs back there that teams can actually fear a little bit, have to game plan for. Then obviously this offense looks much more different than a lot of us are thinking. My issue is that every time Braylon Allen has gotten the ball in short yardage situations, it seems like doesn't get that yard. He doesn't get that push. It's been an ongoing thing. His size has never been a problem. His power and his running ability out the middle, that has been a problem. So I'd like to see this guy take this as an opportunity, and it's probably one of his last opportunities, really. I know he's very, very young. I'm not saying, this is a situation where he'll be out of the league if he can't figure it out. He's still under contract next year for the Jets as well, but time is running out from, the spectator situation. We've got to see something, and we've got to see it on the football field at some point in time. Braylon Allen does need to take that next step at this point. I mean, and me and Dom have talked about it you know, for an extended period of time. We've all seen more out of Isaiah Davis than we have out of Braylon Allen. And, Braylon Allen was brought in to be that secondary running back. Isaiah Davis was more brought in to be that situational third running back type of player. But again, we've seen more out of him than we have Braylon Allen. So, again, happy his stock is up. Want to see more of it when we get to training camp. And then obviously want to see him take that next step in short yard situations this season and take the role that he was drafted to take. That's obviously a big one for him. Next up is Adonai Mitchell. All understand the situation here. Jets trade away Sauce Gardner for 2 first-round picks and Adonai Mitchell. So Adonai Mitchell was a throw-in at this situation, but if we recall, 2 years ago, he was drafted in the second round. So obviously a player with upside, just fell out of favor in Indianapolis for whatever reasons. And at this point in time, you kind of ran up the depth chart. He's your number 2 across from Garrett Wilson. Obviously, other players have the opportunity to take that role and, run with it. Nobody is being restricted by any means. Any player who wants a specific role, any player who wants a particular position can go up and take it. Adonai Mitchell is out there. He's penciled in right now as your number 2 wide receiver across from Garrett Wilson. And from all accounts, from what we're seeing out there, and obviously, there's these practices aren't taped, they're not recorded. All we have to go by is what's being reported out there by the viewers and spectators, the insiders that are there. But by all accounts, it seems like Geno Smith and A.D. Mitchell have a pretty good rapport. They have connected on a number of occasions, and it looks like maybe A.D. Mitchell has found a home, found some comfort in this Frank Reich offense. If that's the case, I mean, you're talking about a player that could very well take some pressure off of Garrett Wilson, who's a player that we all understand what he's capable of. He's at 1,000-yard seasons with guys like Zach Wilson, Mike White throwing the ball to him. Just, a lot of players out there that maybe shouldn't be out in the football field throwing to Garrett Wilson, and it doesn't matter. He's eclipsed 1,000 yards every single season been in the league, except for last year, a year where it was shortened because of injury. But, the biggest concern with Garrett Wilson has always been that, he doesn't have a player on the other side of the football field to take pressure off him. When teams want to double team and, bracket him, they're going to be able to do it. And obviously quarterbacks have struggled to, show any model of consistency where you feel like you're going to get the most out of him. We still have, in my opinion, not seen the most out of Garrett Wilson, and not because of his own accord, but because the team around him just hasn't been prepared for the type of player he is. Maybe now with all the additional skill players and the revamped offensive line, and obviously Geno Smith being behind center, maybe we can now see what a legitimate NFL offense can and should look like. So obviously A.D. Mitchell showing positive strides is a huge, huge plus. Going into the season, my biggest opinion here is that Mitchell is not a player you want to pencil in as your number 2 wide receiver. You want him to obviously earn that role. And if he can earn that role, you want him to excel at that role. And again, by all accounts, he has done that. He's impressed the Jets. And he is, to this point, looking like the player that can be that secondary option for a quarterback. Obviously, there's no pads right now. They're in gym shorts, running around on the practice field. You'd like to see how this transpires into training camp. There's going to be a long layoff here. Now that the mini camp is over, I think they will report. Looked at it earlier. I think it's July 25th is the reporting day for training camp. But I think eventually, there's the first 3 days where there's no pads. So I think by July 31st, by the end of the month, these players will be out there and they'll be ready to roll in pads. So obviously that's the big step for the wide receivers. With that additional weight, can he just keep it going? Has the practice intensity for training camp impact him? Moving on, and again, this is a list of offensive players, which is, huge, huge positive from what we've experienced in the past. Omar Cooper has been another player that has, shown some positive signs. This was an expectation. Omar Cooper is a guy that, last season really increased his stock based on his play for Indiana, an undefeated championship season. A player that really rose his stock, being a physical, yards after catch type of player that has good balance. And again, another player I just feel like really complements what the rest of this room is. You look at the Jets from an offense standpoint, they really have versatility at all different levels of this offense. And it's huge, huge, tip of the cap to what Darren Muji has been able to do. You have Garrett Wilson, who's just a lean figure, speed, can get to the ball, doesn't necessarily have the physicality, but he can make some of the most ridiculous catches that you've ever seen. In fact, he has made over the course of the last 3 seasons 2 of the most insane catches. When you go back to Week 1 a couple years ago against Buffalo, that end zone catch that he had. You can go back to the Houston Texans game. I believe it was on Thursday Night Football. I believe it was a Halloween game too, where he makes a catch in the back of the end zone where he basically gets 1 foot down, and then while he's still in the air, gets that same leg down, on his knee down to get that 2 feet, 1 knee equals 2 feet type of situation. He's just an immaculate, an amazing player, one we're very fortunate to have on our team. Then you go to the other side of the field, you got A.D. Mitchell, who's a bigger receiver with a lot of speed, can get down the field. He'll be like your deep ball threat, the guy that I think that the Jets were hoping Aaron Smith could be, not to the same degree, obviously, Smith being a smaller frame. But I think what the Jets were looking for with Smith is someone who can go down the field, stretch the football field, and open things up for Garrett Wilson. That's what A.D. Mitchell can be. And then Omar Cooper just being that slot guy, that intermediate route guy that with a lot of speed as well, who can just, defenses have to make sure if he's a guy that, from what we saw in college, if he's a guy that can make the first man miss, you need to, orchestrate your defense in a way where you know where he's at all times, and multiple people can get around him very, very quickly to ensure that he doesn't do what made him so popular in this last draft. That yard after the catch situation is something that has really increased his stock, obviously. So again, what they've done on offense is just really, tip your caps at what Darren Muji's been able to do to this point on the offense side of the ball. And then switching over to the defense side of the ball, D'Angelo Pons obviously showing a lot of positives. That's another positive. Again, this list here with multiple rookies showing their progress is a huge step in the right direction. Again, not something as Jet fans we've been overly accustomed to, especially on the offense side of the ball, but D'Angelo Pons coming out there. I don't know what the situation looks like here. Part of the concern with a lot of offensive players being on this list is what's going on with the defense is my first initial thought, especially at the outside wide receiver type of outside corner type of situation. Pons is most likely going to be your nickel. That's just my opinion. I think they start him there, get him comfortable, and obviously he'll probably play a little bit inside and out. He's not going to be like pigeonholed to nickel. But my concern is what's going on the outside. You got Brandon Stevens, you got Azaria Thomas, you got Deshaun Wright. Those 3 guys, probably 2 of them are going to be your starters on day 1. Is what we're seeing from the offensive skill players an indictment on what the secondary is doing? Or are these guys just playing their ass off? And if that's the case, I'm more than happy to hear that, obviously. But it's obviously a concern. It should be a concern. That's Jets secondary, when we're winding the clock here next offseason, it's my opinion that, either in free agency or in the draft next year, we're probably picking a corner to, be your lockdown guy on the outside, hopefully. But yeah, as of right now, that's a concern, but it's positive to hear that D'Angelo Pons, our second round pick, probably the player with the most upside in this entire secondary. It's positive to hear, secondary being the corners only. It's it's positive to hear that he's moving in the right direction. A draft pick in this past year, obviously a player we all have a lot of hope for moving in the right direction. So, and then also I missed on Isaiah Williams, obviously a kick returner from last year. Recently reported on the Jets Collective podcast that he does with Jake Asman and Brandon Tierney. He reported that Isaiah Williams was working out with some Olympic runners, trying to increase his speed. And Isaiah Williams is already a guy that had shown a lot of promise last year as a kick returner and a punt returner. In fact, won a couple of games for us last year against Cincinnati and Cleveland because of his kick return skills. If he can add an extra dimension to that with some additional speed, some of those kicks that maybe, he couldn't hit the outside fast enough or whatever, that additional speed will obviously get him around there. So, and part of it too is he actually, I mean, if you watched him last year, he showed some promise as a, third or fourth option in the wide receiver room. I think he was really our second or third option if you consider John Mechie, A.D. Mitchell, and him were out there. He was really like your third best wide receiver last year. They're not going to ask him that this year unless there's injuries, obviously, to the other three guys I mentioned. But he's probably your number 4 wide receiver, and they'll have a set of plays for him, especially get him in space. We all know what he can do with the ball in his hands from a kick return standpoint. If you get him in space, and if Frank Reich can dial up some plays to get him the ball with some blockers in front, obviously it just adds another dimension to this offense. And again, when was the last time you really were able to talk about the Jets in this light, especially on the offense side of the ball, that they have players that you can really develop certain packages for, and that's their thing. That's what they're going to do, and teams have to watch out for this. And it just hasn't happened in such a long time. So obviously, this is me summertime visualizing my optimism out there, but there's a path to where the Jets can have an offense that looks something like what you see from 30 other teams every single week in the NFL. Am I missing anybody? Other players you just heard, you're just hearing some positive endorsements for. Obviously, Demario Davis, we all know what he can do. He's gonna be a team captain. I just we all kind of can put if you can kind of identify players on the defense that will be the enforcers and the captains, it's gonna be Demario Davis. So obviously he's a player that obviously showing some positives to this point. Minka, obviously he's been around the block for quite some time. He's gonna hopefully help the secondary and these safeties, the younger safeties too, to develop into a stronger back end of his defense. And maybe that helps support some of the issues I've mentioned earlier with the outside corners. Kingsley Enagbare, that's actually another player that Rashmi mentioned. When the Jets got him, I thought this was a pretty solid move. I didn't think they spent too much money on him. Bringing him in on a relatively team-friendly contract that, he's going to have a role on this team. I think when you look at the edge position, you got Joseph Asai, you got Enagbare, you got Will McDonald, you've got David Bailey, few players here that all do different things. And, obviously on your Monacan lineup, he's primarily going to be your interior defensive lineman, but, number of players here, Tavondre Sweat being an interior, you have a front 7, I'll call it front 5 from this standpoint, because obviously the linebacker core behind Demario Davis has me a little concerned. But you have a pretty revamped front line to this defense that, with a number of players that you can expect good things from. And it's hard to dissect what players are doing well right now. They're not in pads. Obviously, that's a major concern. To this point, not really concerned. Just obviously hard to project. But Bailey was second overall pick. You're expecting that this team has a plan, a projection for him that he's probably going to be one of your primary guys out there on 3 downs. Obviously, you know, his run defense is one that got called out a lot on that during the draft process. But I personally don't believe it's as bad as maybe some would make it seem. He's obviously was drafted highly for his pass rush ability. So then you have Asai who can be your primary guy out there in run type situations. Can give you a little bit of juice in the pass rush game. Will McDonald, we all know what he can be as a pass rusher. He'll be like your second and third down type of player. But Engbari, I think, is a guy that has a significant role on this defense, and I think he's going to be like your strong early down type of player. And in situations where teams are in third and longs, expect the Jets to deploy like a situation where he might kick inside and be almost like your JFM type. Obviously not to the extent what JFM was with us, but he's going to have a significant role here. The Jets targeted him very early in this offseason process, so there's something they see in him. They see some abilities there that hopefully, Aaron Glenn can get the most out of him. Then we transition to the stock down players. The positive news here from what Rich Media has reported, the stock down players are Bailey Zappi and Brady Cook and Cade York being a concern. I know the Jets were on Sanders too, so the thing I want to point out here is a lot of these guys may not even be Jets when the season starts. Maybe they'll be practice squad players. But if Cade York is struggling, as looks like he is, chances are he's not even going to be your starter when season comes around anyway. But it is concerning. Obviously, we had Greg Zoin, we had Folk last year. Greg Lloyd was a few years ago, but we had Folk last year, allowed him to walk out, got a contract elsewhere, and he had a pretty damn good season for us. So some concern there that now we're having struggles with kickers. I know we've already had a few kickers in and out of this building. We brought an undrafted free agent for this past draft cycle. We already had Younghoe Koo in there. Been a number of names already floating around that building. Cade York was a free agent signing that we had earlier on in the process. That obviously is not looking good, but it's obviously major concerns from that standpoint. But the fact that our stock down guys are a couple of third or fourth string quarterbacks doesn't really concern me. It concerned me if this Geno Smith situation obviously doesn't fall in our favor, and there is some wrongdoing there, concerns there, but not major concerns there. But that's the report that I have at this point. Obviously, coming from Rich Samini, this list, and obviously just my information gathered from other insiders and what they've reported to this point. But we're not going to know much until really all eyes are out there. Once you get to training camp, then all the fans get their cameras out there, and we see, what this whole thing is about, what this team looks like, especially behind Frank Reich. We just don't know what to expect yet. He's been out of the league for a couple of years since Bryce Young's rookie year. So maybe that year off with Stanford when he was over there, maybe that gave him new life and something else to bring to the NFL. But just not much you can really do other than read between the tea leaves. And from my perspective, it just looks like there's a lot of positives to this point. But we'll see as we get closer and closer to training camp, or when we get to training camp, what else really looks like. And then once the games start, preseason games, we'll get a better look. Speaking about that, so what's coming the rest of the summer for us, or rest of I guess before training camp, we will be out next week. I'll actually be out going to a concert is the plan. So we will not be having a show on July 7th, but we'll come back on the 14th. And on the 14th, we'll do positional breakdowns. I haven't decided with Dom yet whether we want to do offense first, defense first, whatever we want to do there. We'll do that on the 14th, and then obviously if we do offense on the 14th, we'll kick over to defense on the 21st, and we'll just give like our grades for each position group. Who do we think is going to excel? I haven't decided if we're going to do like stat projections yet. I think we'll wait for closer to the season to see what see how they do in training camp before we're just putting blind numbers on particular prospects. But that's what we'll do here, the 14th and 21st. And then, like I said, I think players were reporting on the, I want to say it was 23rd and 26th. I saw, but somewhere around that ballpark. And then, like I said, there's like a couple days where you have to have padless practices, condition testing, stuff like that. Things to eye for that period of time. Obviously, you know, I call this like the Mekhi Becton cycle. You know, can Mekhi Becton get through the conditioning cycle without vomiting half his lung out? You can. You're hoping all these players get there. They're well conditioned. They're ready for training camp. You're looking at players who had injuries in the prior year. For me personally, Garrett Wilson is the number one player I'm looking at. Sadiq falls right behind him. Player just had surgery a couple weeks ago, I want to say it was. I want to say it was a few weeks ago. Yeah, so Sadiq's another player that I'm concerned for. Any player coming off an injury, they start training camp on the POP list, hoping the Jets have a positive bill of health and we can just get through and roll from day one and get there. Braylon Allen obviously being another one you definitely want to watch out for. But that's our target, 14th, 21st. Hit either offense or defense on one of those days, hit the other side the other day. And then if my dates are right, I'm looking at it right now. Sorry for this. So it looks like, all right, this source doesn't even have exact dates, but it says around July 25th. So yeah, based on the calendar, the 25th would be a Saturday, and then we would be back on obviously the 28th for our first post training camp podcast, or first training camp podcast, where we can talk a little bit about what we've heard over the weekend. Maybe share some videos if there's some out there that are able to be shared. And then that's obviously getting right into the heat of things. We'll have weekly shows, obviously. I'll extend my schedule. I know I do Tuesdays with Dom. I'll probably do a different day during the week just to keep the progress rolling. We'll have some guests on, obviously, as our target. So obviously, we're getting to that point in time, and then before you know it, September rolls around and we have real football games, and it's exciting stuff. Exciting stuff. Obviously, if you're a fan of the Mets, baseball has not gone well for you. If you're a fan of the Knicks, we won the ship. Got plenty of gear out there. Got championship hat in already with the crooked logo. Gotta obviously figure the situation out with that and get that corrected with the NBA shop. It's kind of crazy that they did that. If you've got one of those crooked hats, definitely call them out on that, because that's absolutely ridiculous. That first championship in 53 years and they're sending out crooked hats is absolutely insane. And if you're a fan of the Yankees, I mean, obviously you guys are in contention situation. The Yankees are the Yankees. They should make the wild card. Hockey's over. Not much to look forward to at this point. But now with football rolling around, you just hope the Jets don't put us in a situation where the season's over by the beginning of October. I always target my birthday. Can we just look normal up until my birthday, which is in mid-October? If we can do that, then at least I got something to be excited for when my birthday rolls around. But too many times, it seems like we got to my birthday and the season was already over, which is really, really sad, considering how early my birthday is in the football season. But that's looking to what the season has entail. Chris, appreciate you, constant supporter of the channel. He's always on here. If you haven't already, again, I want to just make sure you all know, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you were unable to chat, I should have mentioned this earlier, but didn't do it. If you weren't able to chat, hitting that subscribe button allows you to chat. So obviously it helps our channel grow, but it also gives you the opportunity to be able to chat and communicate with others other than Jets fandom. And again, just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. It's how others will be able to hear us and how our channel will grow. Appreciate everyone for joining. Slow time, not much to talk about, but obviously, we're getting closer and closer to the point in time where, the real season's going to start, and obviously training camp, preseason games, be a lot more to touch on, a lot more to discuss as we get closer. But until then, appreciate everyone for joining, and let's go Jets.